Hello, in this lecture we will take a look at the Blazor client-side hosted. So basically, if you've seen the client-side section, you know that client-side runs on the browser using WebAssembly and all that. But in this case, we will also add a backend to that whole thing. So it's very good because you can have all that backend related information. You can run something on the backend. You can do it in a sort of more safer way, perhaps. And you have the backend, sort of API part kind of thing. And then you have, of course, the client. And client part is basically the navigation for the pages. Okay, so let's start with that and let's take a look at the Solution Explorer. And in the Solution Explorer, we see several things here. We see web application 1 client side, when we have .server and .shared. So the last one, the shared, is basically just a class library, just a simple class library that holds it's kind of like models for MVC. Very similar thing. If we go to that, actually in this template, we will see the model for the weather forecast. Okay, so we got that out of the way, and now let's take a look at the client. Take a look at the client, and the client, it contains several different things, but as you can see, again, if you've seen the client side lecture, you will know that it is quite similar. In fact, it's almost the same. You have the index, you have fetch data, you have the counter. So if, say, we go to counter, it's actually not even similar. It's exactly the same. So you have the same. Basically, you have this this variable, and then this variable gets displayed right here. So every time it changes, this value in this place of this paragraph will change. And then, say, on click, you will call this method, and this method adds 1 to this variable every time this button is clicked. And that all happens on the client side, and that's the reason for this whole thing. But also, it's quite decent navigation system. So for those of you who have seen the client side, it can be a bit boring here, but it will only take 3 minutes to go through this. So basically, the navigation. Now, if we go to Razor, index.razor, we will see that we have the page and we have the default route. Now, if we go to the shared folder and we go to main layout, you will notice that we have inherits layout component base. So that is the main page, that is the first page, right? And then you have the body. And the body is the part where the data gets rendered. All the data gets rendered into that body. And the way it happens, it simply happens if we go to nav menu right here. If we go to nav menu, we see those links, we see the href. So basically, the link in the URL box changes, but the whole thing doesn't actually reload. You only get a new page in this body. Wherever you place that body, you'll get a new page in that place. Okay, so now we have that out of the way, and we have that nav menu.razor. We have nav menu.razor, and as you can see right here, it is used as any HTML element, so you can use it in that way as well. You can load the Razor pages through say this add page and route. You can load it like that, of course, there's no problem with that. But you can also just use it as any element. So if you want to get a bit deeper look at that, I would suggest going to the client side section, because we won't get into deep with that here. just go to a client side section. It's going to be the same exact thing. Now, let's go a bit in the startup.cs. Again, we are still in the client. And as you can see, it's simply the app. It adds a component, and the component is this app.razor, and this basically starts up the router for the whole routing of the pages. Now, the more interesting thing is the server part. Okay, so what do we have in the server part? First of all, we do have the startup. We have the startup, and we have in the services, we add MVC, new software JSON. That's for the JSON, obviously, output. And then you have, you can do different response compressions. This is all by default. I would not suggest changing any of that, especially when the technology is still in the early stages. And then you have, you need to use routing, and you need to use endpoints. And then finally, you need to use Blazor. Use Blazor, and then you have client, and then you have startup. So basically, now you go to the client, and client is this project. This project actually client is. It's not some library. It's not some, class. It's a whole project, and you get to that, and then you go to startup, and then that's how you get all those pages to be handled through this project, the server project. So the whole architecture isn't really that important to us. What is important is how this thing actually works, because there will be probably a few changes before it fully comes out. So we just want to see how the stuff that will stay would work. Okay, so let's get out of here, and now let's take a look at the controllers. So controllers, let's go to the controller, and we see this little object here, so it doesn't really matter. And then we see this weather forecast action, right? So again, it's like any API. It's pretty much the same. You could do different kind of a routing system. You could do just a hard-coded route. You could do, of course, HTTP GET, and then you could assign route to each action. It's like any API controller. If you're not familiar with those, take a look at the API course then. But this is very general, as you would have in any normal .NET Core API. Okay, so now moving on a little, we have the fetch data. Fetch data, that is the page. And let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens. So you have a page, fetch data, and then you have using web application shared. So this will basically allow us to get to the model, Probably not called model here, or it might be. We aren't really sure yet. But it is that basically the object for the output. So we have that object. And now the interesting part in here is how would you actually make a call. So you have get JSON async, and then you have the type which you would get, and then you have the actual route. So this HTTP thing, it has several options. Let's see if we can actually take a look at them. No, I don't believe we can. I don't believe we will be able to do that. As you can see, this is a bit difficult when it comes to the whole IntelliSense thing. It doesn't work exactly as you would hope it to. Let's see if we can do HTTP. Then we can do, and on dot it doesn't do anything. So in any case, let's get back to it, and then in the next lecture we will take a look at how to do the post request, how to do all those other different requests, because in this case we are simply getting the JSON, but obviously you would want to know how to actually post the JSON as well. Not even a JSON, you might want to post something else. So again, it all happens in this functions tag. It all happens in the functions tag. And what's interesting here, if the page loads, you have this if statement, forecast equals null, and then you have loading. And then else, if it's not null, then something happens here. So every time forecasts variable changes, this whole if statement will be reevaluated. So you can play around with buttons, you can play around with many things, and we will actually try a few things. We will create a new page. And we will call it test page. So we go to add, we go to new item, and you'll notice we won't find the .razor file yet. We will only find .cshtml, and you can't use .cshtml, you have to use .razor. And let's do test page .razor. Let's see, and let's click add, and we should have it. And now we need to put in a route for the page. So let's do add page, and then let's say test page. Very easy to understand, very easy to follow. And let's put in something here just to test if the routing works for the pages. So let's do works simply and easily, just like that. And now let's create an actual button which will route to this page. Go to nav menu, and let's just copy one of these list items, nav links we need. And as you can see, the href part, it replaces that whole URL string, and then that page gets generated, implemented into that body tag. Okay, so let's do test page, just like that, and let's call it test page, just like that. Okay, so we have it. Now let's launch it and see what happens. It should work perfectly, there's no reason for it not to. Now it can take a few seconds to load. As you can see, there's a lot to build, prepare, and do all that. And in general, the server-side application will be quicker to load actually than the client side, because obviously there's a lot more to download from the server, but usually it won't make too much of a difference. So feel free to explore both options. So we have that. Okay, now we have, and let's see if the test page works. See, and it works perfectly. Now I was talking about fetch data, so let's go to that. And if you saw that for a brief moment, it was loading, and then it displayed that fake weather forecast. A fake weather forecast, just like that. And then if we go to counter, we will see that it does the client side code on here, on the front end, on the client side, rather the C# code on the client side. So now let's get back and let's do something a bit more interesting with the test page razor. Test page .razor. So let's write a little function. Let's write. Let's just delete all that and do functions, just like that. Functions expanded, and let's do a little integer. Let's call it TST. There's no need to think of a decent name for it. It's a waste of time. Just name it and you're good to go. Okay, so now what we are going to do. Now we will create an if statement. We will create an if statement and then we will create a for loop. So it's kind of the same thing as we saw in the sample data, but this will be a bit more interesting. We will have inputs and we will have outputs. Okay, so now let's do a little if statement. If, let's do if true, so that is if DST equals to 0. So if it's equals to 0, there's nothing to display, and let's write nothing to display, just like that. And then the next one will be else obviously, and then here we will have a for loop. We need those numbers just to see that we are actually displaying something from a loop. Let's do for, and then let's do here tst, just like that. Okay, tst we have, and then let's do right here, let's do void clear, just in case. So this will clear all the values. It will clear. Okay, we have that. So now we have that loop and we need to loop through it. We'll create a paragraph and we will insert the I. Now be careful, when you have that variable, it will all seem kind of nice if you just write letter I, but this will actually be a letter I. If you want the variable, you want to write at I, and then that will be the variable. Okay, so now we need to create a little input, and we will bind. Let's do input, and then let's do simply bind equals, and the bind, you need to bind to a specific variable, and to do that you write at est, you write the specific variable that you want to bind it to. And remember, this is a two-way bind. So if you insert something into the text, into that input box rather, if you insert something into that, it will get assigned to the tst variable, right? And it will happen vice versa if the variable gets assigned in some, or rather through some other channel. Okay, so we have that out of the way. And now let's do something even more extreme. We will create another method. Let's do void. Let's do get remote value. Okay. So we will get the remote value. So we called remote value. And to do that, we will do the same thing as we saw. Let's see. Fetch data eraser, I believe. Yes, we had that. And we will do the simple get JSON async, and we will just get the JSON. Okay, so now let's go to the controller. Let's create a new one just in case. Let's do new item, and then let's do where is it, web, and then let's do controller class. It doesn't really matter which one. Okay, and let's do test controller, but we will be using a different route. And or rather different routing system we will be using. So, and obviously it's a different route. Okay, so let's do public, let's see, integer, let's see, serve remote number, let's call it. Again, it doesn't really matter what the actual name of the method is, makes no difference at all. And let's do simple return. Let's see, let's do free. Okay, let's do that. And then a little route. Let's do route the test serve test value. Serve test value, test slash serve test value. And also let's do http is it get http get, and it should work perfectly. It should work perfectly. We'll see if it works or not. Now getting back to the test page, getting back to that, we will need a little value. So let's do tst equals, and we need to actually insert that using statement, the http. Now again, it's a bit difficult to work in these let's say conditions, because you can't really use properly all that IntelliSense. So just go with the default. You will obviously need to go outside of that at some point. As you can see, you have HTTP client injection. Let's just copy that. But also you will notice this error, right? It's an error, and you would think, why is there an error? Why I'm not saying anything? But there's actually no error here. It's just a problem with the whole reading of the code. So again, it's still in the early versions, and there are still some quite decent flaws. So let's get back to the test page. And let's paste it. And we have our HTTP. Now let's see if I can find the actual method. Get JSON, I believe it was a sync, something like that. And we need the type. I'm not sure if I made that right. To void async, first of all. To do void async. It is async void, not void async. Okay, so it's async void, and then you can do asynchronous stuff. And then let's try integer, and here we need that. But again, just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna get back here and check if I have that right. I do actually have that right. Get JSON async, I believe, right? Get JSON async. So again, it's not showing any suggestions here. It's a bit annoying. That you can't really use the IntelliSense properly. That's probably one of the reasons that you would actually use Visual Studio and this whole Microsoft technology thing. That's probably the reason why people love this stuff. Okay, so let's just do what was the route. Let's check, and it's test serve test value. I'm just gonna copy it to be sure. Now I would always suggest to just copy and paste the routes, copy and paste them, and you know, in that case you can be completely sure that it's the right one to put in. Okay, so I believe we have that assigned, and then on clear we need tst equals 0, just like that, and we need to await. Actually, we need to await this one. Okay, we need to await, and we need a couple of buttons. So let's do button. Let's do the clean this one. Then copy that. Let's put them all in one paragraph, just so we are sure we won't make a mess of things here. So the second one, get remote, and it's gonna be quite simple. The first one, we just call up the method on click, the event on click, and then that is clear. It's not clean, but clear. It doesn't really matter. Not like that. We at clear. Okay, that's perfect. And now we just need to get the remote and see if it all works. So let's do get remote value. I believe that's a method. Okay, it is. So we've written lots of stuff, and now let's try to launch it. And see if it actually works or not. So remote, remember it was number 3, so it should display 3 paragraphs. Should display 3 paragraphs. And this is just perfect if you need to output a list, if you need to output search results. I mean, this is absolutely amazing. It will save you perhaps even hours of work. Okay, so we are waiting for that to launch, and it should launch. And as you can see, this thing loading, so this is actually what I was talking about. It takes quite a while to download all the code, but then the idea is that it works quite a lot faster than any JavaScript you can get, and all that single page app nonsense that you might see, always React and stuff like that. So let's do test page, and as you can see we have 0, so there's nothing to display. Now let's try to do 15, and as you can see nothing happens yet, but if I click here, if I lose focus, when I lose focus it gets binded. So obviously it needs some kind of a trigger to get binded. You could do that on change, you could change that, but it's good enough on lose focus, because usually you will need to bind that and then you will need to click a button to send it to some remote connection or do something like that. So it makes no difference really. And as you can see we do have 15 outputted, 15 paragraphs. They start from 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 13, 14, and that makes 15. Now let's try to clean it, and it cleans perfectly. Now what you also notice, it binds both ways. So we had 15 here, and we cleaned, and we got 0 here, and we got 0 in the variable obviously, so we have nothing to display. Now the most interesting part, get remote. Let's click on that. See, and that doesn't seem to work. We can try to debug it, and that's probably will be the most interesting part of this lecture, the debugging of it. Let's see if it actually works or not. If not, we will just leave it at that. So let's put in a breakpoint here, put in that here, and let's try to actually see if this does get to the server or not. Okay, so now it did get to the server. And I also see it got even further than that. It seemed to be working like that. Okay, so it works, but I probably didn't click the button properly, and it just happened like that. Okay, so with that you can experiment and try all those different things. You have to be careful. I wouldn't recommend using it yet on a real project. I would suggest waiting a couple of months at least until they release the final .NET Core, or the final preview versions at least of .NET Core 3.0, and then you can start developing these truly modern applications. And with that we will conclude this lecture.